I'm doing work on rental housing in Hyderabad, which is a city in India, and this is my poster, which is very beautiful, but I don't see it up. So here's my poster, and it's called Negotiating the Informal. So I'm looking at informal rental housing. Quick brief on India. We're a large country with lots of people, and the city population has gone up by 32% in the last 10 years. Most significantly, 1 in 4 urban Indians is considered poor, so under the poverty line. This graph you can ignore, but it basically means that India has lots of million-plus cities. The other interesting thing is that 85% of people who rent in Indian cities rent informally, which is that they don't have a written contract with their landlord. So these are verbal, oral contracts. So an overwhelming majority of Indians who rent in cities do so without a formal contract. There's some literature out there on informal rental in India, and we find some interesting things. So landlords do not calculate value based on monetary cash considerations, landlord-tenant relationships are not purely transactional, and landlords are not always maximizing short-term gain, if they're maximizing anything. So this is what we draw from the literature. And what I wanted to try and understand is who are the people who live in informal rental housing? How do they get access? What are the rules and practices around renting and letting of spaces in informal settlements? And how do these rules vary across the city? So I'm looking at one city, but I'm looking at 2 distinct sections of that city, or 2 distinct urban and built environments. The city is Hyderabad. It's in kind of south-central India. It used to be in a state called Andhra Pradesh. Recently, Andhra Pradesh got split into 2 states, and it is now the capital of a state called Telangana. It's a new state, and that's the kind of orange region here. Hyderabad is a 400-year-old city, and it has a lot of history, and this is sort of the old part of the city. This is an iconic monument to Charminar, which was built 400 years ago. You can see that there are lots of old, dilapidated buildings that are starting to crumble. In fact, this was taken a year ago. This building no longer exists. This is sort of what a typical informal settlement in Hyderabad, old city, would look like. This is the new city. This is high-tech city, which was built about 12 years ago. There's lots of steel and concrete. Microsoft, Facebook, all have offices in this area. You see a lot of construction. You see these are sort of 20-story buildings in the background. This is an informal settlement. There's construction. It's very new. There's lots of stuff happening around the space. This is one of the settlements. So I'm comparing 2 settlements, one in the old city, one in the new city. This is Jahangir Nagar in the old city. You can see that the lanes are quite narrow. The built environment is not necessarily old. So there's some new construction, there's some bright colors, there's greens and purples and very nice colors. This is the new city, Hafiz-Pet. The roads are wider, but you can see infrastructurally they're still catching up. Some of the roads are cement, some of them are metalled, but they're wider, and there seems to be more space. So these are the 2 settlements that I was looking at rental practices in. So quick thing on the composition of the sample. This is not a very exciting slide, but it basically tells you that I've looked at about 95 households across the 2 settlements. So 46 in the old city and 49 in the new city. And sort of these are some details of the number of owners and the number of... so this is essentially what I'm going to be concentrating on, which is access. How do people get access? So do they use family connections? Do they use social networks? Is it advertising? Do they use an agent? Or are there other ways in which tenants find landlords and landlords find tenants? Right? I'm trying to understand what it is. They don't use the internet. Nasir is a young man who lives in the old city. His father is an auto driver. I don't know if any of you have seen an auto rickshaw, been to India. An auto rickshaw is an informal form of transport. And auto driving is a very common occupation in the old city. His father feels like he's going to be driving an auto for the rest of his life. Mohammed Haji, who lives in the new city, his sons work in construction, but he's a painter. He's holding a painting out. He pays about 6,000 rupees, which is about £60 monthly rental, whereas Nasir's family pays about 2,500, £25 a month. Now, there's some discrimination we see in supply in these informal sections. There's a preference for married couples with 2 children or less. Most landlords don't want to let to bachelors and singles, even at higher rates. Single women, it's very, very hard for them to get rental accommodation, any accommodation at all. There's no clear sense of discrimination based on religion, but there are the other forms of discrimination. Types of agreements, they're verbal, it's monthly rent, deposit, 30-day notice, deposits between 1 month and 5 months rent. And interestingly, everyone said that they get the deposit back at the end of the month. The relationship between the landlord and the tenant can vary. Now, this is a comparison of the access parts in the two settlements. They're fairly similar, but there's one important difference. You'll see that you have sort of a small percentage of agents and middlemen who are operating in the old city, which is Jahangirnagar. You don't have that in the new city, but you have these to-let boards. So I don't know if you can read, but it says TO-LET, to-let, so to rent. And it says that, and it says only for bachelors with a T in front of the CH. So it's very special kinds of bachelors. You see this in the new city. So you see people who are wanting to reach out to strangers. In the new city, you don't see to-let boards. You don't see people advertising that space is for rent. But it does seem to be more secure for women. Women in the broader, in the larger streets are wearing the hijab. It's a predominantly Muslim population. But you'll find, you can't see that in the photograph, but in the narrower lanes you'll find women actually don't wear that because the blurring of public and private space. Anyway, this is my last slide. These are some things that have come out. So there seems to be more cohesion in the old city. It's more difficult to get access for people who don't have connections. The new city is more open, but at the same time it's a less secure space. Sorry, that's my presentation. Thank you.